Top 3 things you didn't want to see. Number 3. Shipworms, which aren't actually worms, they're mollusks, and a group of saltwater clams with a long, soft, naked body. They also live inside and eat mud and rotting wood. And I'm not sure who decided to stick this in their mouth, but apparently they taste identical to clams. Number 2. The tongue-eating louse. Despite looking like the worst parasite discovered since 24-hour news, the louse isn't harmful to the fish in any meaningful way. This is after eating the host fish's tongue. The ones on the tongue are the female, and the males kind of sit back behind her, eating the scraps of the scraps. And number 1. Your yellow walls might not be yellow. Smokers in a house can change the color. The devil's lettuce will give you a soft beige, while the boomer cancer stick will give you a vibrant yellow. So yeah, depending on how often you partake, you could be painting your walls for free. Top 3 animals you'll probably never see. Number 3. The barrel-eye fish. Considering only 19 have ever been spotted in the wild, and you'd have to somehow just be chilling 2,500 feet underwater off the Pacific Ocean to ever see it. And if it ever washed up on shore, it resembled a soggy piece of jerky more than a fish, so. Number 2. The Ethiopian wolf. These are very isolated animals that are found in less than 10 relatively small areas. There's as few as 200 left in the world, and even if you somehow find yourself on top of a mountain in Ethiopia with binoculars, there's a good chance that's just a regular schmegular dog. As of recent with DNA testing, it's been found that some domesticated dog males have been sneaking out at night and getting jiggy with the female wolves, creating some half-breed. And number 1, it ranks number 9 from the top 10 species at risk from climate change. They were once found on the entire island of Kauai, but after massive deforestation and rising temperatures, the akikiki, who needs a cool forest canopy to survive, is now confined to just a single plateau. In 2021, after a full year of searching, only 3 mating pairs could be found, and could quite possibly be the 34th bird species to go extinct on the island since the arrival of the Europeans. If so, like this last surviving Kauai oh-oh, the akikiki will call out for his mate, and there'll be no one left to answer. Agent Orange deformities, an extremely effective herbicide, was dropped all over the country of Vietnam during the war by the US military. From 1962 to 1971, over 19 million gallons of herbicide was dropped, nicknamed by the orange stripe going across the 55-gallon drums. It wasn't a herbicide, but a concoction of herbicides, ones that contain toxins, which are extremely persistent pollutants, and most importantly, highly toxic to humans. Toxins cause immune system damage, interfere with hormones, cause cancer, and oh yeah, cause some pretty extreme physical deformities, along with developmental problems. The most common second-generation effects from the poison are neural tube defects, which are neurological disorders caused by malformations of the spinal cord, but also comes with an impossible to count number of deformities, like fish skin and being born with no eyes. The US dropped the millions of gallons over the packed Vietnam force, causing 4 million people to suffer due to exposure, and ended up with over 500,000 babies born with birth defects. Lingering Agent Orange was potent enough to kill 400,000 US soldiers. The Vietnam War is known as the war that lingers, and there's no telling on when the effects of Agent Orange will fully disappear from humankind. Time out. Commercial break. Only 7% of you guys are subscribed. Help me change that. 92.4 of you guys subscribe right now while you're watching the video. That way you never miss one of these. Kids in war. As of lately, we've seen a bit of romanticization of kids when they went off to war, like Johnny Glenn, the youngest soldier in the Civil War. When the South tried to band together and take down America, no man was too young for war, leaving Johnny, at 10, out on the battlefield. He saw more death than you could imagine, but unlike most kids then, now laying in unmarked graves with their age and a possible state of origin, Johnny himself lived to old age, and was the youngest non-commissioned officer to ever join. It's weird how photos are selectively picked to look like a bunch of 30-year-olds, but the age distribution shows you how young the war was really fought. And though the Confederacy didn't really keep good track, there are more than enough accounts to see their soldiers were just as young, 11-year-old David Freeman being the youngest. Up to 420,000 soldiers in the Civil War were minors, and somewhere over 100,000 were under the age of 15. Today, for middle schoolers to sophomores going out to die, somehow glamorized. Teenager Michael Dodry was caught by the Confederates and was the only member of his company to survive a torture camp in Georgia. Teens with no clothes, starved, stocks, hand screws, barbed collars, all used on kids. And that's the tiniest sliver of story in a relatively short war. Top 3 facts you won't believe. Number 3. The fussy bivalve, also known as the soda sea creature, mostly because of its reaction with carbonated drinks, automatically reacting their defense mechanism. As a member of the sea squirts, they, as their name hints, squirt by forcing pressure to remove liquid when they themselves are removed from water. Number 2. This bowl of soup is 45 years old, and is served in a family-run restaurant in Bangkok. The soup is called Nua Tuna, and when it runs low, they just add more ingredients, but it is suggested tourists do not eat this, due to their own sensitive stomachs and many deaths. And number 1. This is Ukraine's president in 2004, Viktor Yushchenko, until Russia disagreed with his leadership and continuously poisoned him, which he lived through, but he did develop these terrible skin scars as a result. And for these facts, I hope they were so unbelievable you didn't actually believe them, because they're all lies. The fussy bivalve was just a scene from an old Japanese movie. The bowl of soup is actually cleaned every day, and the last one, well, that one was actually true. But in a time where getting the right information to the right people is critical, it's important to be sure you're viewing from a valid source. And no, your Aunt Jessica's post on Boomerbook most certainly does not count as a valid source. The Wizard of Oz torture, the Tin Man. every one of these actors was tortured during the filming of what would end up becoming the third most watched movie of all time. Because the average temperature of a day on set was a bit over 100 degrees from the extreme amount of lights, along with the working day being 15 hours, there was good reason for Buddy Ebsen, the original Scarecrow, then the original Tin Man, left the production on a stretcher and never came back. Pretty much everything used as costume and makeup was deadly, as Tin Man's body was covered in pure aluminum dust to get a convincing color. And if you don't know, it's not too healthy to be breathing in metallic dust, but what made it worse was his allergic reaction to it. Only a week into the filming, his arms, legs, and hands became paralyzed and he passed out, mainly due to too much aluminum coating the inside of his lungs. But he was put on oxygen and almost died a few times, but that didn't stop the director, Melvin Leroy, from calling him and telling him every day for the 2 weeks he was bedbound in the hospital to get the heck back to work or you're fired, which he ultimately was. Jack Haley was his replacement. He was forced to stay in costume, so during breaks in filming, he stood on a reclining board instead of sitting like everyone else, resulting in body aches for the rest of his life. The Wizard of Oz torture, the Scarecrow. Ray Bolger was a naive scarecrow, and before the part, a naive actor, because he didn't know every day the crew would be waking up at 4 a.m. to glue a mask on his face for an hour, which would end up being his last hour of comfort, as the glue covered up every pore in his face, meaning he wasn't able to sweat properly. And as the foretold lighting situation would have it, at 101 degrees, sweating, let alone acting, and I don't know, staying alive, would be a bit difficult, as sweating is needed to cool the body, and the temperature of 103 could make you delirious. So looking back at everything was a hazy memory at best. But back to the mask, the extensive length of time and strength of the glue would leave Ray Bolger with permanent indentations on the lower part of his face. And if the outside of your body being permanently damaged isn't enough, he was lucky enough to be hanging with the rest of the crowd when it started snowing. Asbestos. That's right, 100% industrial grade asbestos that causes mesothelioma, along with the 32% increased odds of bladder cancer. Luckily, asbestos is mostly dangerous when it's friable. Unluckily, this is friable, and Ray Bolger himself died of bladder cancer. And I don't usually like to point the finger, but you monsters killed Scarecrow. The Wizard of Oz torture, the lion. The cowardly lion played by Burt Lahr was actually more courageous than you think. If you hadn't noticed from the first two videos, MGM had sunk the most money they ever had into this movie, and had no care as to what happened to the cast, as long as the movie turned out half decent. So Burt wore the simplest costume to mimic a lion, an actual lion's hide, that weighed a little over 110 pounds, which includes pads and multiple pounds of sweat just soaked into the suit, and one would need a lot of strength to carry that weight around all day. So he ate tons on set, or should I say, drank tons on set, as his face mask inhibited him from properly opening up his mouth, so all his meals for 6 months on set were blended up and drank through a straw, which obviously gave him extreme diarrhea. And if that wasn't bad enough, because of how exhausted he would be after carrying around all his weight and dealing with explosive milkshake butt, he had little to no free time, getting off and immediately collapsing from exhaustion, only to get up the next day and do over 15 hours again. Like the actor that played the Scarecrow, the asbestos caused long-term side effects, as the long-term inflammation from the fibers predisposed one to recurrent bouts of pneumonia, which ultimately ended up taking his life. The Wizard of Oz torture. Dorothy, played by Judy Garland, while being the star of the movie, made a measly $520 per week, when her co-actors were making $3,000, and while Judy was 17, Dorothy was supposed to be 11, so they had issues with her figure, starting off by giving her an extremely restrictive diet. Some people's only job was to sneak around Judy to make sure she wasn't eating. When that wasn't enough to reverse puberty, they gave her multiple cups of coffee, along with a whopping 80 cigarettes a day, but raising her metabolic rate so high, she had little to no energy to actually act. She then heard the producers calling her a fat little pig behind her back, and to her face would call her little hunchback because of her mild scoliosis. All this being pretty average for how women were treated in the 30s, but still wrong by a moral compass of anything smarter than a grapefruit. And still, she wasn't skinny enough, so they made her wear a corset during the duration of the filming. And whenever they noticed her beginning to collapse, they'd give her a pet pill. 17-year-old Judy was given barbiturates and amphetamines. Amphetamines are powerful stimulants, so powerful she might go 3 days on only a couple hours of sleep. So barbiturates were given to her to force her to sleep. She would eventually become addicted to these until her death, which sadly was caused by a barbiturate overdose. The Wizard of Oz torture. Cast and crew. Toto the dog, played by Terry the dog, was injured on set. He was out for 2 weeks with a sprained ankle after he was stepped on. Margaret Hamilton, who played the Wicked Witch of the West, her green color was made of copper dust paint, kinda like the Tin Man's paint, except copper is toxic to humans. Like the asbestos and Tin Man's dust, they knew it was harmful, but simply didn't care. But Margaret did, seeing as she suffered from Alzheimer's caused by copper poisoning. Not only was she permanently green for almost a year, but after her signature smoke and flame exit, a reshoot ended in a pyrotechnic malfunction, where Margaret was directly hit by the blast of fire. She had second-degree burns on her face and no skin on her right arm and hand, though her open wounds were now filled with the painful, toxic copper dust, which landed her in the hospital for a month and a half. So her stunt double had to ride her broom, that exploded in midair from the pipe being clogged with, who could have guessed it, asbestos, sending the double Betty crashing to the floor, leaving her in the hospital for weeks, with quote, permanently scarred and disfigured legs. And nobody ever fought MGM, as fighting them would mean an instant end to any of their future acting endeavors. In the great country of the United States of America, freedom is what's most important. That's why we have freedom of speech, unless you're naming your baby. Then you're most definitely not free to name your little raisin monkey whatever you want. Some things are just flat out banned, like symbols and numbers, preventing you from making your baby's name look like a modern day password. But that can't stop some people, like Victoria and David Beckham, who named their baby Seven. But still, they got the name they wanted. Some very famous names are banned because apparently there can only be one Santa Claus, Jesus Christ, and the third, and also, you can't name your kid the most common low-class Midwestern term of endearment, king and queen, which I think should be allowed, because why not? They're gonna get Kathy, the shift manager at the Des Moines, Iowa Best Buy, confused with the closest queen besides her, Queen Elizabeth II? Well, the second? But I guess it's some Brit beef stuff because Majesty, Judge, Duke, and Master are all also banned. We got a couple of names I won't be saying, and lastly, we have some unique names that are legal, like teachers Mr. Perf and Miss Rape, who I wonder if they ever taught flavor balls, or knew Fat Ho, Dick Seaman, or Mo. Rest in peace, Mo. Lester. Bonnie Elizabeth Parker and Clyde Chestnut Barrow, the two most preferred robbing small shops as they were easy targets, but by the end of their crime run, they had also robbed 15 banks, killed 13 people, 9 of which being police officers. Clyde was one of 15 kids who grew up poor, which led him to stealing. They ended up meeting in 1930 at age 19 and 20. Then Clyde was in the jail for stealing a car, he escaped, got captured, killed an inmate, and then chopped off his own toes to avoid hard labor. And if you haven't noticed, Clyde is a master criminal con man, and Bonnie fell in love with him. They robbed banks and stores in Texas, Minnesota, Indiana, and Louisiana, and they had no problem shooting anyone who got in their way. A member of the Barrow gang split to see his mom in Dallas, where he was arrested and confessed to everything. But the rest of the Barrow gang were still robbing and killing for months, when finally the lead group on the case hid in the woods and lured Clyde into a trap. While Clyde pulled over to see a single helpless man on the side of the road, the rest of the team jumped out of the woods and opened fire, where the first shot struck Clyde in the head, killing him instantly. And as Bonnie screamed, 130 more rounds were emptied into the car, taking Bonnie as well, ending the lives, but not the stories, of a small gang of mass murdering robbers. What if I told you there's incest that takes place within a family that doesn't even involve touching, and you very well might be involved? Covert incest. It occurs when a parent is unable or unwilling to have a relationship with another adult, and instead forces the emotional role of a spouse onto their child. And one big sign is jealousy of the child's other relationships, limiting their kid from having a boyfriend or girlfriend, or intruding on any of their other relationships, by secretly telling the child bad things about someone they might look up to. Other signs are preventing the child from having space of their own, putting their emotional needs before the child, and relying on the child for emotional support, like dumping world problems that have nothing to do with them onto them, or they're just trying to live their life. And that's why it's also called emotional incest. And most of the time, the kid has no idea this is abuse, as doing things like homeschooling them to take them away from other relationships, micromanaging who they can see and for how long, and the kids feeling bad for them, making them believe they're just close and couldn't even be abusive. Yet the effects of covert incest mimic the effects of actual incest, leaving the kid with mental, emotional, or physical reactions that are drastic and irrational, lifelong problems with relationships, and re-victimizing behavior, intentionally placing themselves at risk for future trauma, since sadly, it's their normal.